Hello and welcome to Valencia College's Writing Workshops. My name is Chris Brown and I'm the Lab Center Supervisor at the Writing Center of Valencia Winter Park. So today we have a pretty short workshop for you on critical reading and annotating text. This workshop covers what to do when you get a short story to read and you need to know how to annotate that text to make sure that you take away from it whatever notes you need to write about it. This also includes essays, and even your own essay. So after you've written something and you need to make sure you understand what you've written, you can take notes and annotate your own work as well. So let me share my screen with you and we'll get started. Remember, you can always find all of these resources, this document I'm about to share with you, as well as recordings of all of our workshops through the Writing Workshops LibGuide. The easiest way to find it is just type in Writing Workshops right at the Valencia homepage, and it should be that first link there for you. All right. So today we're discussing Shooting an Elephant. Now, we're not going to read this story together, but you will find part of it in this handout. So if you look at the back of the handout or the next page, you'll see an actual excerpt from Shooting an Elephant, which you can practice with. But let's talk about what kinds of techniques you might need to use to make sure you get the most out of your different readings of the text. So the first thing is I'm suggesting that you actually read it in a few parts. You're going to do a preview, you're going to do your first read, and then you're going to do an annotated read. So a preview is where you take a look at the title and the author and you make some inferences. If it's called Shooting an Elephant, it's probably about an elephant getting shot. Not the most fun subject. So we can also assume something about the tone, right? It might have a sad tone, might be kind of dark. It might have themes of death, of guns, right? Those are some really simple elements that we can get just from the title. Then we might also look at the author. So George Orwell wrote some interesting dystopian fiction. He wrote in a certain time period and he used certain themes throughout his writing. So just by searching George Orwell and looking up a little biography about him, you can learn something about Shooting an Elephant as well. So make sure you go through the title, make sure you analyze it for symbols, for wording, for tone, and then also look at the author's name, investigate the author a little bit, and make sure you do a quick Google search just to get a sense of who the person is. This will provide a lot of context for you. And if you get an about section in your textbook or before you read it, or if your professor gives you some information, make sure to read over that information. It also really helps to know the genre, fiction, nonfiction, right? And it also helps to know what you're going to write about. So if you have questions that you have to answer, read those questions in advance. If you have some kind of rubric or assignment handout, make sure you read that handout before you get started reading, because then your brain will be percolating with all the right thoughts to catch the right elements and details from the story. So now you should do a first reading. And a first reading, I suggest doing it without annotations. Don't worry about noting anything. The only thing I would worry about is getting through the story and making sure you have a good sense of understanding. Now, when I do a first read, I generally will underline things that really struck me as important, or highlight them, or whatever notation you like, putting a star next to it. But instead of making any notes about it, I just mark it as important and keep going. I also will mark anything I don't understand. So if I encounter a vocabulary word that I don't know, it's not noted there for me, or I can't figure it out, I might put a star next to it so I can look it up when I'm done. So after you've gone through your first read, take some time, maybe make a few notes about what the story meant to you, what stood out, maybe make a little summary of the plot as it comes to you. That's called free writing. So just write about whatever came to mind after reading the story. Then you're going to do your annotated reading. So this is a critical reading of the text where you're actually going to look at different elements in the story and try to pull out examples of those elements. So for instance, if you're reading an essay, you might first want to find the thesis or theme of that essay, and it'll usually appear in the first paragraph, right? So as you're reading the first paragraph, you're going to look for that thesis statement and highlight it, mark it up so you know exactly where it's at. Now, in a short story like Shooting an Elephant, specifically in this short story, the thesis really appears in the last page. So just keep in mind that the main point in a story might appear throughout, while the main point in an essay, especially an essay you've written, might appear in the introduction. So there's a few different elements you can go through here. You can use different structures to go through a reading too. There are the elements of literature, which include things like character, plot, theme, setting. And then here we have for you a sort of a mix of rhetorical themes, themes that might help you if you're writing about the essay or the story, and also elements of literature, things like tone. All right, so first I would talk about the passage's purpose. So this might be something you got to when you wrote your little summary at the end of step 2 here. But if you didn't, then this is a good time to think about what's the purpose of this story or essay. What's their perspective and what are they trying to tell us? This gets really close to the thesis. Then you might look at diction. This includes what kind of vocabulary did they use and how does this affect your reading of the text? You might also just want to check to make sure that there are no typos if this is your writing, right? So for instance, we see here, if we look closely and did a second reading, we'd probably find some other elements that we missed the first time around, including wording or specific names. So looking at diction is really important. And that includes looking for repeated words and ideas. There might actually be something hiding just in the way somebody says something, right? Or how often it's repeated. So tone is the writer's attitude, and that's always going to be something that you can tell after you've done a reading or two. Because when you get to the final impact of the essay or the story, usually it's something we understand in hindsight after we look back at the story. So in Shooting an Elephant here, you certainly will hear his tone come out, Orwell's tone come out in the last paragraph, even though the whole story is actually narrated by a character in the story. But really, we get Orwell's perspective at the end. So then we can look at themes, and themes are how did this author share that perspective? So what kinds of ideas are they exploring? So in Shooting an Elephant, we have war, we have colonialism, we have servitude, we have all sorts of different themes. And this is ways of naming different parts of the text or different ideas that the text explores. So setting is very important. You might have come to this when you were exploring George Orwell as an author, but we also want to know when the text is written, but also when is the story set? Where is it set? What's going on in history? And for Shooting an Elephant, there's a lot of historic context to explore. So it's important here that you know a little bit about Myanmar, for instance, and the relationship with the British Empire during this time period. This will get you closer to the theme of imperialism. So sometimes just opening up the setting, researching the setting a little bit will tell you more about the themes and even the purpose of the passage. So then you might focus on the audience. Who is this being written for? If you look at that last page of Shooting an Elephant, you'll find out that Orwell was really writing to British people. And he had a particular perspective on colonialism and the British Empire going into Myanmar, and he wanted to share that with other people, perhaps in the time period. Now, of course, he also wants to make a bigger point about imperialism in the world, and it's a point that we can understand too, perhaps as students of literature, right, or students of history. So there are other audiences too mixed in, and it really depends on how you look at it prospectively, right? So when you're annotating, there's lots of different ways you can do this, and you should follow your own technique or derive your own technique from this, but you can underline or circle something. You can highlight it. Always look for that thesis and make a note of it. You can just even make little notes on the side. You can ask questions in the margins, questions that come to mind or things you may not understand. You can write those down. And now you can fully consider the questions of your assignment that your professor's given you. So let's say you are doing some annotated critical reading of your own essay. You probably know your own thesis. You probably know all the words you used, right? So instead of focusing on that kind of annotation of exploring the text, you as the author instead are going to do some summary. So if you're looking at your own essay, first, make sure you have a strong thesis statement in your introduction, and then use just 2 or 3 words, as few words as you can, to summarize that thesis in the margin. Next, when you read the first body paragraph, make sure you have a really strong topic sentence, just like that thesis statement, but it's going to start the paragraph out. And then make sure you have good evidence that supports it and do the same thing. Summarize that paragraph in just a few words on the side. The reason you're going to summarize each paragraph is because a really important way of notating your own essay is finding out to make sure if all the parts of your essay work together, that they support the thesis statement. So when you go back and look at all your little summaries, they should stem into one another. And all of your body paragraphs should, of course, link back up to that main thesis statement. Sometimes this is just a matter of getting the vocabulary right or making sure your paragraphs are focused in the right way. So this notating process is very helpful. I definitely advise using it. I think Benjamin Franklin said that he would make these notes on an essay he really liked, even if he didn't write it, and then he would use just his notes to try and write the whole essay again. And he would do it again and again. So he would make notes on his new essay, and then he would write another essay from his new notes. And in this process, he got closer to the original text that he wanted to emulate, but he also, in that process of writing and rewriting from his own idea, got closer to his central idea. So I hope this helped you understand a little bit more what it means to critically read a text and annotate a text, including your own writing. And make sure, of course, to visit all our resources on the LibGuide. And of course, stop by Distance Tutoring, which is our online tutoring through learning support anytime. Easiest to find it just by typing Distance Tutoring or online tutoring in the search bar on the Valencia College homepage. Thanks for visiting, and I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.